Good morning. Hemshech, Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We're on page 1166. Around 2/3 of the way down. The line begins b'bchinas ha'ara, lavad, u'bchinas dveikus. We're going to begin by inyan hu. So where are we at? Clearly a very central piece in the whole Hemshech, understanding Atzilus as that interface, as that meeting place, where the divine meets existence, where bligvul meets gvul, the words he used earlier on the top of this page. So in Atzilus you have both Das Elyon and Das Tachten is what he began discussing back on page 1162. This mimer began by saying, after the long discussions about the different four levels of and types of bittul of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and then going back to the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, which concluded on page 1160. And what is the difference? That the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is the field of energy, the channel between Yesh Amiti and Yesh Nivra, the creator and the creation. The channel in between is an Ayin that breaks into two. One represents the Yesh Amiti, one represents the Yesh Nivra. And in that itself, there's the two Deis. The Das Elyon is the Ur of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, recognizes and sees things from the perspective from above, all the way the four different types that we discussed. And the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra sees things from the perspective from below. So in this Maimer, V'lekachtem lechem, that began in 1161, said, now, these two days in general is from the Maitzel to the Natzalim, from the emanator to the emanations, which means that in Atzilus you have, like he said, Atzilus hu alakus mamish. So b'derech klal Das Elyon is Atzilus. That's how he began. Then on page 1162 said, Be'emes, Omnam Be'emes, there's Beis Deis hanal. These two perspectives are also in Atzilus. And this has been the ongoing conversation now and discussion that in Atzilus you have both elements. On one hand, there's a structured world and domain, which is olam, from the word helam. On the other hand, it's alakus. So it's a divine structure, as we've been discussing, which is, then he went to explain the Pasuk Eliyahu, to explain it all, that the Pasuk Eliyahu explains that Atzilus is a step below of Antu Chad V'lei B'chushbin. You are one, but not a measurable one. From there emerges Antu Dafikus Lon, Tikunin, V'Karinan Lon, Svirin, that then emerges from there, from the 10 garments, which are called 10 spheres, because they have the both elements of being a garment, but also an illuminator. And what kind of garment? An attached garment. As opposed to Biyah, the second expression is Levushim Tikinun Lon, that's the Levushim of Biyah, that's on page 1164. 1164 and 1165 was discussing at length, how do we explain these garments, these attached garments of Atzilus? So he explained it with the Koiches HaNefesh, the faculties, especially the Koich HaSeichel. So even though these are faculties of the soul, to the point that Koich, the Nefesh HaMaskelas, a human being, is defined by Seichel, but it's still not the Etzem Nefesh, not the core spirit of the soul. The faculties, on the other hand, the faculties are still extensions of the soul, as he explained. Okay, and therefore, in that way, they expressing the words of the Pasuk Eliyahu. So the Eidos and Kelim of Atzilus are like those koiches. They're like the faculties, their expression. The chad, the level of the nefesh itself, gets concealed in them. The same thing, the 10 spheres are, and within that is the lashon used from this kasiyas mebnei nasha, ubahun is kasiyas mebnei nasha, that the divine that dresses up in these garments gets concealed, covered up there, and yet it's still an extension of the nefesh. In the same case, Atzilus is still an emanation from the emanator. Then he broke it down further and said, and lahan hoge b'hein alman, so the Eris and Kem together come to govern, to create and govern and guide the existence. Okay. Then he said that elsewhere it explains that the mashal of the koach hamaskil and the seichel, which is again a relationship between the faculty as is within the soul and the faculty as it becomes expressive, is specifically for kelim. And he explained that therefore the mashal then would be because kelim, you don't see, there's not a revealed dveikus and connection between the keli and the source. It's functioning and being guided completely by the source, but you don't see the awareness is not quite there like the Ur. So the mashal he did use for Ur and its source is a tree, is branches of a tree. So the branches, they're extension of the tree, though they're not the very tree. The fruits grow on the branches. So the branches, on one hand, they're a reflection and extension of the tree. At the same time, they're not the very etzem of the tree. So they serve as an example for the branches for the 10 spheres. So bottom line, Eidus and Kalim together, the spheres in Atzilus are the force that become the interface. So on one hand, they're divine. On the other hand, they're structured. They shine through Chochma Bina. And then finally, the last thing we learned was that the Eidus have in both these elements. On one hand, they're dveikus. They're connected to the source. On the other hand, they're a reflection. They're an expression. So they can serve the both dual roles of both expressing and channeling the divine creative energy of creation. That's the last thing we learned. They're both an extension of and dveikus, the order the other way around that I just said. And that's why they can serve that role of being mokeliyes hisavas hayesh debiyah, which is the whole purpose of the Esesphiris, Zeh called Ayin Esesphiris, to be lan hoge b'hein alman. So you need both elements. You need something that relates to existence, Yehi Ur, Yehi Rakia, Chochma, Bina, Das, and you need something that is completely devoted and dedicated to an extension of the divine energy that it was invested in that creative process. So that's where we'll continue now. If someone has a question, you can ask a question. If not, I'll just continue by Inyan Hu on the line that begins b'bchinas ha'ara levad. Okay. Here we go.
Lahan he kol almin, is that the level of the spheros within Malchus of Atzilus, or is it lower level? That specific
all
level.
the 10 spheres of Atzilus.
As a vested Malchus or as they are by themselves?
It doesn't speak Malchus here. More specifically, they're going to be channeled through Malchus into Biyah. But they are the 10 spheres. It's like saying the Asarim, they're the 10 spheres. They are the DNA and the building blocks of existence. Chochma through Malchus. Earlier we learned that they channel through Malchus into Biyah. But it's still, Malchus doesn't have of its own anything. Everything Malchus has is channeling the spheres above it into creation. So here we're talking, the Eser, it says clearly, Eser, the Lashon is, Afikus Eser Tikunin. The 10 garments, the 10 spheres, all the spheres. Yeah. Earlier in the previous Maimer, he learned about Malchus, where he was discussing the difference between the Ayin of the Yesha Nivra. But he didn't get back to that yet. We'll see where it goes. Right now, Atzilus has both elements in all the spheres. We learned how Atzilus is in general Das Elyon. Now Atzilus has both. Later he may say that Malchus is primarily Das Tachten, the highest sphere is Das Elyon. But right now, all the spheres have both garment part, attached garments, and illumination, as he explained earlier. Behirus. Okay. So now he says like this. Va'inyanu. The inyan of this is Kamosha Kosav Be'ageres Hakedesh Siman Chaf. So you can see that he keeps returning to this Ageres Hakedesh again and again. As I pointed out, this Ageres Hakedesh is a very fundamental letter, or you could say Maimer even, that the Alter Rebbe wrote just a few weeks before, or maybe days before his passing, which is this week actually, Chavdal Tevis. And in it, he laid out some very new chidushim in the whole process, especially of the mile of the Yesh HaNivra, and the process of creation. So we've been learning the Sekeres HaKedes back and forth for the last good 20 pages. From there, the Rebbe Rashab explained at length, if you recall, why the Yesh Amiti is the only thing, Mitziyusim Atzmuse, its existence comes from within itself. That's straight language from Sekeres HaKedes Simachav. But there's also other aspects of Sekeres HaKedes that were discussed, including Malchus, because that koyach is embedded in the earth that gives birth, that makes things grow, certain Yesh Ayin, and also, which he's going to talk about here, how does the koyach ha'atzmus, that is the only power, hu levade b'keiche v'yecholte, only he can create Yesh Ayin ve'efes ha'muchot yesh, that's a self-contained Yesh, does not sense and feel its source, can only come from atzmus. The process is through Oir. Oir is basically the paintbrush, you can say, but an attached, not like an external paintbrush. The channel of energy used by God in the creation process, because Atzmus is beyond existence. The power to create is Atzmus, but that power is channeled through Oir to create, which is what he's going to discuss now in the context of Atzilus. It says, Siman Chof is the epistle or section 20. There he says that the koyach ha'mahava, the power is only Atzmus can create a yesh. Oir can't create a yesh because Oir itself is not a yesh. Oir itself is completely dedicated and just an extension of, an expression of the divine Atzmus. All it is, a reflection of its source. So how could it create something that's a yesh that feels that it has no source? So that comes from koyach ha'atzmus. But the process, the actual way it's done, is through Oir. So Oir is the mahava, because it's me'ein ha'moir, liyesem ein ha'moir, hu mehusev atzmusei. What's the moir? Mehusev atzmusei, the essence of atzmus. That's the moir. Since Oir is all it is a reflection of moir, and let's make it clear, it doesn't mean it's a reflection of all of atzmus. It only means that it's nothing but an expression, an extension of Atzmus. Obviously, Atzmus is beyond Oir entirely. But Oir is an entity. God created the concept of bittul, of awareness, of gilui, all about just expressing Atzmus. So Oir becomes essentially the acting agent, if you wish, of being the Mahava. So why does the Alter Rebbe have to add Ma'in HaMoir? Why not just say Oir does this? Because Oir doesn't have any power of its own. Precisely because it's Me'ein HaMoir, which means it's Dveikus, it's completely connected and attached, and all it is an expression. We talked about the chief of staff. It's even deeper than the chief of staff, because the chief of staff is still in the mashal as an entity. There's the king and the chief of staff. Here, think of the Malach, the king, the Atzmus, as a mashal for the king, beginning to express himself, even to himself. That's really more, even before he speaks to the chief of staff. There we use the mashal because I wanted to explain how that is carried to the next levels. But be'etzem, the melech himself has to first go through a state where he wants to express himself. And through whom does he express himself? Through the chief of staff. So the chief of staff is in a state of dveikus. But if you go deeper, just to point out that it's not, that's mamish like Oir. Oir is all it is a reflection of Atzmus. I'm only breaking it down just to distinguish, so to make sure that it's not ever seen as a separate entity. So the only power it has is due to its connection to its source, not because anything of its own. That's why. So that's what he's bringing proof. He wants to bring proof that Atzilus has the power to create. Why? Because it has the power, it's carrying the power of the dveikus that it has to its source. And that gives it, therefore it can carry the energy. Now, of course, Atzilus is lower than Oir, but he's giving it as an example to explain how it flows. So he says, so it's the dveikus that gives it that power. Take away the dveikus, then there's no Oir, and there's no carrier, and there's no channel, there's no anything. But then on the other hand, why then Atzmus alone doesn't create? Because Atzmus is beyond all of everything. So v'gam zeh, an additional point, the second part of it, why Oir is the carrier is mipnei shehu ha'or levad. Being that it's only a reflection, like remember the branches, it's only a reflection. It's not the core itself, but it's nothing but the core expressing itself. So that's why it has both elements, which is what he's bringing to explain how Atzilus, both elements, Dveikus and Ha'ara. So he says, Shahari ma'atzmus ein sof ef shaliyas isav shayesh. From atzmus ein sof cannot be the creation of the yesh. Now you can ask, of course, the question, what does that mean? The creator is atzmus. Hu levadei, because only he can do it. And he can do whatever he wants. Or has something that atzmus doesn't have, God forbid. So the answer, of course, is, he's not stating it clearly here, but it's a given always, is because it's the only way to make sense. Of course, atzmus can do everything. You don't need to have Oyer, you don't need Atzilus, you don't need Seder Shtalshlus. Atzmus says, I want a world, you have a world. Doesn't need anything. But then there wouldn't be any logical progression. It would be a built-in Metzias Nimtza, a reality that's completely beyond us, Metziusim Atzmusei, Mechuyev HaMetzias, something that's completely in a different, completely beyond us entirely. And yes, poof, he created. Since the Eibishter wants that we should have some inkling and some semblance, some understanding a bit, as much as possible, in the process, in order, the second point, for us to be able to connect to it in a progressive way. So Oyer is that reality that Atzmus uses. It's his Oyer to manifest and create at least Metzias Nimsa. Now you could say something exists. Without Oyer, you don't have the word existence even, because we don't call Atzmus existence. We call him built-in Metzias Nimsa, a non-existential existence, meaning an existence unlike anything we will ever even be able to fathom or even dream of, imagine. So he created something, a field of energy that is at least in common with us, that exists. Its existence, on the other hand, is but only an expression of Atzmus. Basically, it's a Metzias Nimtza of that Atzmus has, that's expressing what Atzmus wants. So we have now at least something that hold on to. It's still a very high level, because we don't even have a Ratzon yet, a desire for creation. We definitely don't have the Tzimtzum, we don't have creation. But we have the idea of something that is completely divine. But like he said in Tzadik Daled, if you remember, he says the only reason you don't call it Atzmus is because it's not Atzmus Mamish, it's already some form of expression. He said there in Tzadik Daled, the words were, it's a Metzias, what was the words he used? It's only reason that F was, when he spoke about the highest level of Bittul, the third level, that it's Kol Inyan is Atzmus. He says the only reason it's not called an entity, because the only reason it's called Oyer is because it's not Atzmus Mamish, meaning Atzmus in full glory with everything Atzmus is. But it's nothing but a reflection of the source, and therefore it has both elements. On one hand, it's connected, completely, just an expression. On the other hand, it's Ha'ara, it's not Atzmus itself. So we have something that makes sense. So, which of course on lower levels will be the same idea of the 10 spheres. And the same with Asar Mamoros. Could Atzmus created Oyer, Rekia, Desha, all the creations of the world without the Asar Mamoros? Of course he could have. But then we wouldn't have a way to say, how does the divine relate to that particular structure? How does Elikus relate to Oyer, Rekia, Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rekia? To every item in existence, it would all be some mysterious force that created it all. It doesn't have anything that we can even hold on to. That's on lower levels. On the higher levels, it's Oyer, so it's Dveikus, but it's Ha'ara. It's not Atzmus itself. Only from the energy of the divine energy. Atzilus. I'm sorry, only being a reflection, now it's something commensurate. It's something that is very infinitely distant from us, but it's something that we have in common with. That from this can ultimately emerge the yesh that will be created. You know, I've given the example, just an example that may help a bit from a different angle. In the world of numbers and mathematics, you have the finite set of numbers, you have the infinite set of numbers. So we know that the finite and infinite are infinitely apart. The finite will never reach the infinite. Number one, and trillion, zillion, whatever the numbers are, as far as you go, it never touches infinity, because infinity is beyond, it's a different category. but they're both set of numbers. They're both used in mathematical equations. And though infinity does not, even though infinity is an equalizer, where one and the largest finite number are equal, but infinity cannot say that number doesn't exist. It could say you're only finite, you're not infinity, but you can't say that the existence of the finite set of numbers doesn't exist. You just say it's all equal. But imagine now a level that doesn't even recognize numbers altogether. Numbers have no value, not finite, not infinite. The whole thing is a definition. Even infinite is a definition. Compared to that level, you can't have a mathematical discussion because you need something to hold on to. So infinity and finite, as distant as they are from each other, they're at least in the same realm called mathematics. They're in the realm of numbers. Finite set, infinite set. Or to use the mashal I spoke about, the artist. God manifests of being a cosmic artist, has infinite possibilities of creating art, and then chooses among the infinite one possibility, which is called the 10 hidden spheres. Chochma through Malchus, undergoing the tzimtzum, will ultimately become the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Now, what do we know from this? We know there's a relationship between the art and the artist. But the art doesn't tell you, it can only tell you that there's infinite pieces of art possible. And that has something in common with a finite, not one piece of art, which is one among infinite pieces of art. But it cannot tell you about God as he's beyond being an artist, because that's already a structural definition. He's an artist. Yes, he's a divine artist. So he can do anything he wants and create art, but at least he's defined himself with some form of definition. So infinite and finite are closer in a way than the infinite to that which is the source of the infinite, which is Atzilus in this case. So what do you see from here? That at least the Eibishter created, not artist yet, he's not even an artist, at least he created a field of energy, which is called Oyer, Ha'ara, that now has something in some way in common with existence. What is the thing in common? That they both exist. You're already moved into what we would call an existential reality. However, it's completely divine at that point. It's a divine consciousness. It's a divine awareness. It doesn't have existence as independent existence, and definitely not a yesh. It's not even necessarius at that point. But then it will move. Once you have that, now you have something to work with. So that's why I call it a field of energy, because it's easier to visualize. Atzilus is beyond anything. He creates a field of energy, think of it like an infinite quilt or tapestry, infinite quilt, upon which he will then will emerge from there, will emerge a rotzen, ultimately the rotzen to be an artist in this mashal, and then from the infinite possibilities of art, one particular 10 spheres, slowly, tzimtzum, and then you have the 10 manifest spheres of Eris and Kalim in Atzilus. So therefore, this is sensible to us. This is logical to us. Now, of course, you could ask, who says things have to be logical? But that is God's mystery. He wanted logic to be logic as it is right now, and wanted us to have some understanding as much as possible in the process. So therefore, this is how he put it into place. So essentially, Oyer becomes therefore such a vital force because it is that place which is completely divine, nothing but, and yet it has something that we can talk about that with the Oyer, as it will go through levels, will relate to ultimately to existence. And the Oyer will ultimately be the force in the lower levels of Mamala Kalalman, the energy that actually manifests and gets enclosed, Koyach HaPoel Benifel, Yehi Oyer, in Oyer, Yehi Rekia, and Rekia, the Oyer Eliki that's mislabish in each, enclosed and tailored to each part of creation. But there's also levels of Oyer that remain completely removed from creation. Even though, like I just explained, there's something in common, but yet there's states of Oyer that as we learned, are completely all about bittul, not about structure. However, now you have something that there's something in common, even though it's very distant, but it's still something in common. I'm just explaining the words when he says Atzmus is removed, Atzmus is beyond it all, and Oyer has some erech. Just to explain the words, why it has to be that way, and what exactly is there. Now, this can use a lot of explanation, but if you've been to these classes, I've been talking about this for many, many hours over the years, because this is essential always when you talk about this topic to state these certain givens of how Chassidus explains the picture.
The oil that is removed in the beginning, this is the beginning of the process. You cannot have the oil.
Which oil is removed? Where do you say removed? What do you mean by removed?
You mentioned before that in oil, in the first level of oil, which is above connection even to something else, this is the first step in the process, because you cannot get the oil that is shaykhs to something before you have the oil that is above.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, correct. So the first step is ayin of yesh amiti. All it is atzmus wanting. I don't want to use the word wanting. It's a limited word. Atzmus creating a world of expression, divine existence, if you wish. Yeah, and then you can get to the lower levels, like he spoke eira shaykh le'elamis. Like I said with the artist, before he even decides he wants to be an artist, he's still an entity. He's there. But before being there, even you can't even call atzmus being there. That's why you need to move from the bilta mitzias nimtza to mitzias. Yes, but it's correct what you just said. Okay, good. So here we go. So being that the oir, on one hand, completely attached, dveikus. On the other hand, ha'ara, only ha'ara. So now it has something in common that it could be called liyas mizeh. That from this can come the isavas hayesh, as I said, in a way that we can understand and relate to it, not just a kol yachol effort, kol yachol event. Ach, now he continues. Remember, this is all coming to explain how Atzilus has both dveikus and ha'ara that create these both elements that allow it to be the channel to lanhoge behind alman. That's what he's explaining, those words. Ach, zeu bo'er k'mo sheba ba'atzilus. Okay, so now he's moving downward. Nageres Sakedah, she begins with oyer me'ena moyer. But I believe if you read further there, remember this oyer continues now. As it moves from atzmus, so-called, into some definition, even before the tzimtzum. Then the tzimtzum is necessary because all this is within God's consciousness. You don't yet have a real structure. You have now a place, like he says, sheyochel, he says the words, berach liyas mizeh, you have now a space, so to speak. I don't want to use the word space either, but you get the idea. There's something now, a field of energy, where now a savas can happen. But now you need the tzimtzum to actually conceal all that bli gvul, allow the gvul, the eira gvul of the 10 spheres or the art to emerge. You go through stages, ak, akudim, nekudim, until you get to vrudim, to elam hatzilus. And that's where the real action takes place, in the sense, because Atzilus now is this bridge that's carrying the creative energy. It has Oiris of Atzilus. Yes, it's a lower level of Oir than the Oir higher than Atzilus, but it's now an Oir that's defined by Chochma and Bina, like we explained. It's Elam HaAtzilus. You can't say Elam on Oir Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum that is just emerged from Atzmus. So in Atzilus is where the operation begins, the true operation. So Atzilus, you have Oiris of Atzilus, Kelim of Atzilus. So he says, Ach, because all we talked about was that the air has now the capacity to create. But creation needs more than just a capacity for it to make sense. You need the energy, you need like the ideas, and you need the letters and the words. You need the hi'er, you need the kia. You need shape and form. And that happens in Atzilus. Chochma bina das. Defined by its root, the shershe ha'eris and esespheres agnuzis and higher, like we spoke about. But now the artist is already ready to create the art in a real way. Till now, we've been talking how the artist is preparing himself, so to speak, where he moves from being beyond artist to infinite possibilities, to one finite possibility. And then finally now he's ready. And where is it coming to fruition? Not the early stages of conception, like we talk about often. We're talking about now the child being born. Atzilus is the place that will create that child. Because now you have Chochma and Bina and Das, Eira Chochma, and a Klei HaChochma. Everything is now harmonious. The Eir is concealed enough to be able to create, but it's attached enough to be able to carry the power of creation. Always remember these 2 points. The creation process needs to be, relates to existence, but it has to be connected to its source. That's Atzilus now. So he's saying everything we just said about Eir, Nageres HaKedesh, Where does it come into play? Is be'er k'meshababa Atzilus, comes into Atzilus, u'mislabish bekelim d'Atzilus, and it gets enclosed and manifest in the containers of Atzilus. Chulu. Shahari b'gdei sheyeh mitzias yesh hu idea kelim. In order to be the tangible yesh. We're not talking about the power of yesh ma'ayin hu levade b'kechi, that a yesh that does not feel ein le'ila v'siba. We're not talking about the personality of the yesh. We're talking about the very fact that you'd have a defined, tangible, concrete yesh. Without keli, even if you have like we spoke about, so you have an idea, but you don't have words to express the idea. Or in this case, you have the energy, but you need the energy to reside in something. It would be like having the v'shechanti b'seichem without v'asili migdash. You need the keli where the v'shechanti b'seichem manifests. So you need the keli to create the actual definitions, klei chochma, klei bina, and the oyer that is manifesting or enclosing itself in those kelim. Shahari b'gdesh yim says yes, why they are kelim. U'kamashu koser b'ageres hakedesh sham. It goes back to the Geras HaKedesh. Remember that Geras HaKedesh starts, you know how? Iyu v'chayu ichad, iyu v'garmu ichad. You are one with your energy, with your eir, with your eiris, and you are one with your kalim. Garmu here means kalim. That's how the Alter Rebbe teaches it. So what does he say in the Geras HaKedesh? The iyu v'garmu ichad. That you are one with your garmu, with your kalim, not just with your eir. Livrei behem. And these are the words in the Geras HaKedesh. To create in them, v'al yodam, and through them, ma'ayin liyesh. So in other words, the creative process is carrying oyer that's connected to the source. The oyer is only a reflection. This reflection goes into a keli. The keli ultimately gives it the tangible, or here it's not tangible yet, not Atzilus, but at least the concrete, defined chochma. It's not chochma, not bina. It's not amorphous. It's not how they are in their source, in the koyach hamaskil. It's actual structural faculties or attributes. Chochma of the Eibishter, Bina of the Eibishter, Chesed, Gvura. They're not just all bundled together. They're distinct entities, as we learned at length earlier. And they are one. Iyu v'garmu, you are one with the Kalim, that through which. It's interesting always the words Bahem v'al Yodam, which means in them something is happening. You're also, essentially the creation is happening in them and through them. It's like you would say that a child is being developed in the mother's womb. So it's in the womb and through the womb that the child will ultimately be born. Develop and then be born. Okay. She says, yesh. So what does this mean? She explains, V'hainu. This is the Rebbe Rashab saying, Ayideya Eiris, through the energies, Shaboyim b'b'chinas tzimtzum, u'mislapshem b'kelim d'Atzilus, that come through in a state of tzimtzum, a state of concealment. They're not full intensity as they are in the higher levels. In Atzilus, the eiris are not going to shatter the containers. They're going to fit perfectly into them. So then at tzimtzum mislapshem b'kelim, they clothe themselves in the kelim. Atzilus harihem be'erech liyes b'chinas maka liyesh. That's when they become be'erech. They become something that relates to be a source for the yesh. If the eiris of eiras sevev kalaman, or the eiras that are higher than the kelim, we learned there's higher levels. The Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe said in Sadik Dalet, the higher levels of ayin are beyond kelim. He says if that was the case, yes, they would be not atzmus, so at least you're carrying divine energy, but it wouldn't be something that you could say. It would be like Bereshis Bar Elikim before the Eibishter says Yehi Oir. You need something that you can say Yehi Oir. I can trace the steps from Oir to God saying Yehi Oir, which in turn traces it to the Sphira in Atzilus from where Yehi Oir comes. So basically, you now have, like I spoke the other day, and I'll repeat it again. You can have a person who has tremendous ideas, brilliant, but doesn't know how to communicate, doesn't have words, or his words are inadequate. So what are you going to have? You're going to have ideas flowing, almost incomprehensible, because the words are not properly stated. The person who's so excited by the ideas and has not formulated structured words and sentences and paragraphs that are organized. On the other hand, you could have someone that has a great gift of gab, but not saying anything. You can have ideas, but you need the words and the letters for it to be called a mokar liyesh. Mokar liyesh means It's something that you can now, the idea has some body, so to speak. I don't mean physical body, I mean some body through which it can express itself. So the Oidus of Atzilus, rooted in the Oidus higher than Atzilus, all the way to Dveikus, are now a reflection, not the Etzem. This enters in a very seamless way into the containers, and now you have elements that you need for creation. So really, if you think about it, it's like I said, eloquent. It's a bunch of ingredients to create something. You can't bake a challah or bake anything or create anything without many ingredients. The ingredients here, if I can sum it up, is koyach ha'atzmus above all. You need atzmus to want it in the first place. You need atzmus because only kulavade bekeich is the only one that can create, period. And especially a yesh ma'ayin, a yesh that feels no source in the ilavasiba. So atzmus is behind it all. That's clear. Then you have oyer, which conveys the instructions of atzmus in a very pure and undiluted way. Then you have oyer as it's ready to manifest in, now the oyer is saying, the God's instructions, the oyer manifest in Chochma and Bina and Das. So you have now a structured, let's put it, a structured design. Then you have the kalim, which give it just like in a paintbrush and a canvas, that gives it all body and shape and form in a full sense of the word, not just in concept, not just design in the mind of the artist. And now you have all the ingredients necessary. Obviously, the next step is creating biyah, and all the way more tzimtzumim and more concealments until you have a reality like ours. So this is something you've heard many times, but he's spelling it out now in a very specific way. So Atzilus, of course, reigns supreme here because it's the fundamental interface where the Oidus are carrying the Oid, the Kalim are Yu v'gar muyichad, they're also divine, but they're divine defined structures. And they are both together, joined together, obviously always driven by the koyach of Atzmus above it. And that will be the way the creation process takes hold. Yeah. Okay. If that's clear, it should be clear. It's pretty straightforward.
The Iris and the Kalim is using a little bit a different lotion, but the Kalim is saying Ayin b'chenas moker lebiyah, and by the Iris is saying Ayin moker liyis is havus hayesh lebiyah.
Depends on that. I don't see much difference, frankly.
I'm asking you, it's the same? This is
obviously it's not exactly the same because the Eir is not a Keli, but both together, as I said to you, you cannot have creation without an Eir and a Keli. So he's not really coming here. He's not coming here to really explain the role of the Eir, the role of the Keli. I explained it a bit. The role of the Eir is essentially Dveikus and Ha'ara. The role of the Keli is Metzias and structure and definition. But I don't see much. He keeps saying by both, right here, for example, go here. He says together, be'erech liyes b'chinas makar liyesh. He's saying Eiris and Kalim. It's clearly Eiris shaboim b'chinas tziyum. So I think both together are now in a state of makar liyesh. It could be that later he's going to explain that the Eir is more like the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Keli is more Ayin of Yesh Hanivra. He hasn't stated it right now. The distinction he made is Dveikus, that the Kelim don't have Dveikus. That's why Maskil, Seichel and Keicha Maskil fits there, whereas the branches are connected to the tree. That's the only distinction. I don't know how much you can read into the words. I saw those words. Yes, he doesn't just say Makar Liyesh. He says the words that you just read, that they become, what words?
Makar lehishavus hayesh debiyah.
Okay, but Makar Liyesh is the same thing as Makar Lisavas Hayesh. What's the real difference?
So before he said Makar lebiyah.
Okay, look, I told you there's a distinction because the Eir is definitely carrying the Koyach HaMahava more than the Kelim are. But at the end of the day, it's Eiris and Kelim joining together. Remember, it's like a Neshama Beguf. They become one. The Eir and Keli are not two entities once they're in Atzilus. So at the end of the day, they're working together, each one providing its piece of the puzzle. Okay. Good. So he says now like this, Vihine, and now. This is now 6 lines from the bottom of page 1166. Vihine, The line begins with Mislapshem became the Atzilus. And now, Lefiza, according to this, Sorech Lemer, the Atzilus Gufa, that in Atzilus self, Shem B'chinas Ayin. I don't think it's Sham. Shem B'chinas Ayin, meaning the name of the level of Ayin that we've been discussing. Remember, he spoke about that Ayin has different meanings. Ayin of Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of Yesh Anivra. Unless he does mean Sham. Let me read it again. Yeah, you could also say Sham. I think Sham is more correct. Here's how the nigga go. According to this Sarich Lemer, the Atzilus Gofa, Sham, in Atzilus itself, there, in Atzilus, Ayin, Hainu Ayin Shal Yesh Amiti. You could say it both ways, but I think Sham is more accurate here, not Shem. Even though, as I said, you could interpret it as Shem. I think it's Sham. Sham, the level of Ayin, according to what we just said now. So what is the Ayin of Atzilus? Remember, this Maimer, it's important to go back. The beginning of the Maimer, he said clearly that the Ayin of Atzilus is Bechlolus Das Elyon, which means the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Then he went on and said that in truth it has both. So now, after this whole discussion, he's going back to that and saying that the meaning of Ayin. One second. Let me read it through before any questions.
No, it said Ayin Shel Yesh Amiti ve'Ayin Shel Yesh Anivro. Both.
I'm in the middle of. I didn't even read it yet. Let me read it. That's what I said. Let me read it and explain, and then. According to what we learned, the Atzilus Gufa, the Sham, Bechinas Ayin, or maybe here again, maybe Shem. I go back and forth. I'm not positive. The level of Ayin, Atzilus, is what? Hainu means Ha'ayin Shel Yesh Amiti, Va'ayin Shel Yesh Anivra. Because what we discussed now, if you ask the question, in the beginning of the Maimer, he was speaking about the divine element of Atzilus is purely Elikus, the level of Chochma, total bittul. But then once he broke it down, that Atzilus has also an Eilam, and there's a structure, and there's the Tekinuslun, Afikuslun Tekunin, the Karinulun Sviris, and all that we discussed. So what's the result of this? That the Ayin in Atzilus itself is both the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Anivra. You know, when I read the whole sentence till the end of the line, I think Shem, B'chinas Ayin, fits more.
I don't know, because if it's Shem, he should say Shem Ayin, not to add the word B'china, but maybe you're right. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I mean, either one works. It doesn't change the Havana. The reason I use Shem is because if you remember when he said that Ayin, even though they both have the name Ayin, they mean something very different. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti means total Ayin ve'efes bittul. The Ayin of the Yesh Anivra means it's ein musug and it's not from our mitzias, not mesug mitzias shalonu. That's why it's reminiscent of that element. On the other hand, it's Teichin-wise, Sham is probably more correct. And like you said, Bechinas, because you don't even need, what happens if you took out the word Sham or Shem? It wouldn't be missing anything. If you read, not even sure what the word Sham or Shem is adding.
It's just an emphasis that's
it's not place. I'm not asking a deep question. I'm just talking the digduk part. As I said, the Havana is clear either way, so it doesn't change anything. Just wondering why he added that word.
Emphasis. Sham is B'chinas Ayin both. The Atzilus Gufa.
I understand, but if he didn't put the word Sham, would it be missing anything?
It makes a harchove in the Adgoshe. I don't know.
Okay, fine. I'm sure that Rebbe Rashab is having nachas that we're being medaik in every word that he writes. Okay, good. Okay, Teichen is clear at both levels of Ayin. The lies, and he's going to explain now why. So it's becoming now that Atzilus is now this place. The lias being Sha'oyer who bechinas dveikus b'mkeirei, because the oir is attached to its source, as we discussed. V'hu gam ken bechinas mokel l'isavas hayesh, and it's also a source to the creation of the yesh. Hari b'ma shu bechinas dveikus b'mkeirei, the fact that it's connected to its source, hu bechinas ayin sheyesh amiti. In other words, its attachment to above, to its source, that's the state of the ayin of the yesh amiti, because it's reflecting the kavana and the instructions and intentions of the source. Ubameshu mokali yesh, and by the fact and the element of it, when that which it is a mokali yesh, that here you see clearly it says mokali yesh. The fact that it's a source for the yesh, haru b'chinas ayin shalayesh. So the oir there of Atzilus, therefore, he says here clearly oir. Doesn't even use keli here. Since the oir has both elements, the dveikus element is like its attachment to its source. The creation, the creating being I should say 1 second. And the fact that it's a source, meaning it's a divine expression of Yehi Oir, or let's call Chochma Bina, that's what turns it, that's what, from that perspective, is the ayin of the yesh. So you have an Oir that has two perspectives in it. I think a good example would be a perfect shliach of the Rebbe. If you ask the shliach, what is your mitzias? Are you a shluchis shel adam kamese? Are you a shliach of the mishaleach? Or do you have a function to do something in your city or wherever your mission is? The answer would have to be both. Because if you're only shluchis shel adam kamese, you're not doing what you get done, building a moised, talking to Jews, teaching Chassidus, etc. It's not fulfilling that part of it. On the other hand, if you're only doing the function, but you're not connected to your mishaleach, you're missing that element. So in truth, two perspectives are joining here as one in Oidus of Atzilus. That's essentially what he just said.
I just saw a letter that the Rabbi is writing to ask him that complained that he's having problems. So the Rabbi schreibt to him, "Kol zman ze wird nicht poem bazich, sheze moisad sheyis ekvet muses mulchamei admor, umenalo gam ato, umemelo ze moisad lobavich, ve'ein la'alim ze me'anshei chus vet nit zayin kin tolk."
Right, I know, yeah, very good.
Okay, so this is exactly what you said. Even when you're walking, you have to remember that who is the boss, the Rebbe.
Yeah. Now, obviously, the difference is a shliach is a baal b'chira, and these eiras don't have any b'chira. This is how they're created in the first place. So just be aware of that. Okay. Okay, let's continue.
The mocker leyesh is not an oil. He said before that this is the kelim.
No, that's what you said. Here he's saying an oil. He does not use keli here.
Because before he said the oil is adveikus and the kelim are mocker leyesh.
Hold on a second. He said the eiras are also mocker leyesh. He's saying that all the time. It's not correct what you're saying. I told you I don't agree with your diuk so much. Because at the end of the day, the Eidos, he says in clear, there's a bunch of lines that he makes it clear. B'chinas Eidos and b'chinas Mokel Liyas Isavas Hayesh. You could be medayik, but there's still a Mokel Liyas Isavas Hayesh. And here he's only using the word Eir. He doesn't use the word Keli.
Yeah.
Anyway. The
he said before, b'chinas Eir is the Atzilus, how Eir is the Atzilus, heim b'chinas Mokel Liyas Isavas Hayesh Tabiyah.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, let's not confuse matters here. The bottom line is, he's explaining, he says these words. The Atzilus Gufa, the Liyasha Eire b'chinas Dveikus b'mkeri u'gamkin b'chinas Mokel Isavas Hayesh. So in the fact that it's Dveikus, it's the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, u'b'meshu Mokel Yesh is the ayin shel Hayesh. V'hainu, and this means the Atzilus b'chlal, that Atzilus in general, hu memutze bein Ein Sof l'nivroim, is the interface between the divine infinite and the creations, between the divine and existence. On top of the page earlier, he said between bli gvul and gvul. V'chol mamutza. Remember the theme of Ayin Beis. Keeps coming back to it. Every interface, kol mebeis madregas, encompasses. Within it is encompassed. Within it is encompassed two levels. That's what a mamutza is. A mamutza connects. A connector, by definition, is very muhus. is connecting two things. So it has to have a part of each one. V'zeu Beis b'chinas Ayin. And these are the two levels of Ayin, is the two things it's connecting. So Atzilus is the place where the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra meet, and they're both perspectives are there. That's what he's saying right now. So though earlier we learned the Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, high levels, we learned three different interpretations before the Tzimtzum, Sevev, Mamala. Now he's moved it into, as I explained in the beginning of this Maimer, into operations. The operative element of the Ayin Yesh HaMiti and Ayin Yesh HaNivra come together in Atzilus, because the Dveikus, the connection, it's divine on one side, and it relates to existence on the other. It has both elements. V'ayim Masha Kosov, and delve into what it says. The Biuri Azer Pasha Vayetze. Next page, 1167. The Rebbe Rashab is sending us to look at Biuri Azer Pasha Vayetze. Now, Biuri Azer here refers to the two Biuri Azers in Chassidus. One is from the Mittler Rebbe, where he wrote down all the Maimorim that the Alter Rebbe said on Zohar. Friday night, for a period of years, a few period of time, the Alter Rebbe would say explain the Maimer of the Zohar of that week's Parsha. So he went through the whole Zohar.
Only for his family. He did not allow the other people, I think.
Yeah, there was limits who could go in. The Mittler Rebbe, who was like a real publisher, gathered together all these Maimorim, and he printed what we call Biuri Azer, sometimes called Biuri Azer L'Admur Amtsoi, because he wrote the Hanochis and he published it. Then there's another Biuri Azer. Tzemach Tzedek took that Biuri Azer and added his own additions and gloss and hagos, plus other material. So we have 2 volumes of the Biur Azer of the Tzemach Tzedek. Whenever you see Biur Azer in Maimorim like here, it's most likely the Biur Azer of the Mittler Rebbe. But sometimes, later years, when it was published, Biur Azer, so we have now, Biur Azer, will always say Lahat Tzemach Tzedek. The truth is, if you want to look up any subject, you want to look at both. I'm just giving you a background of what the Sefer is. So Biur Azer, so he says...
The Tzemach Tzedek wrote it on the Mittler Rebbe's Biur Azer, yeah? He's a goy al Mittler Rebbe's Biur Azer.
I just said that, yeah. So in Pasha Vayetze, he says, the Beis HaMadreges heim b'chochma gufa. That these 2 levels of Ayin in Biur Azer says it's in Chochma itself. Till now, it's in general in the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Now he's saying both are in Chochma itself. Now remember, in the beginning of the Maimer, he said all of Atzilus is the level of Chochma, because Chochma mekanano b'Atzilus. Abi Allah mekanano b'Atzilus. Chochma nests in Atzilus, and a Chochma senses an Ayin of Elikus. And there he said the Ayin Yesh HaMiti. Then he went on and said both these perspectives exist in Atzilus. But remember, since Atzilus is primarily Chochma, the Biur Azer makes it clear that both levels are in Chochma itself. And he's going to explain now what that means, which makes sense. Just to remember, it's not a contradiction, obviously, because it's microcosm, macrocosm. Atzilus in general is these 2 perspectives, Oir, Dveikus and Ha'ara, or Dveikus and Mokar Liyesh. And remember, Oiris and Kalim come together here. He did not say that the Oiris is Ayin of Yesh HaMiti and the Kalim is the Ayin of Yesh HaNivra. Did not say that. Can it be implied? I don't think so. I think it's Oiris and Kalim together, have both perspectives. You break it down, it could be a little of it, but he doesn't say it explicitly. But now he's carrying it and says, in Atzilus itself, both levels are in Chochma. And he's going to explain. Remember earlier that Chochma plays a unique role among the 10 spheres. Even though all the 10 spheres are divine, we say that clearly, yet we said clearly, at least twice, he explained how Chochma it all starts from Chochma, because first, Oir Ein Sof, higher than Atzilus, resides in Chochma, like everything, like the Nefesh resides in the Rosh, in the mind, the central nervous system. Remember, we said the mind, on page 1164, the long discussion in the parentheses, he said, is the Seichel that is closest to the Nefesh. That's why Chochma Techaya Ba'aleha and all that we discussed. How the mind has a particularly unique place where their soul rests. It rests in all the spheres, but the Chochma is the channel in Atzilus itself, is the place that it flows through. So Chochma, as we learned, has in it definitely the highest level of bittul. So now he's going to explain, since Chochma is the Reishis HaGili, the beginning of the Gili. In other words, it doesn't start from Keser and it flows into 10 channels. It's Keser goes into Chochma, and from Chochma it goes to all the spheres. So like Rosh Hashanah, when we say Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, the Rosh is the head of all the years, all the days of the year are encompassed in the Rosh, and from there it extends. It's not from Elikus to every day of the year, it's through the Rosh, and that's in the head. In the faculties, it's through Chochma. The attribute of Chochma, Reishis HaGili min ha'atzmus ha'maitzil, from the core emanator, that's emanating the Natzalim, the emanations of the 10 spheres, Ukiyadua, the Lamaylam HaChochma hu Lamaylam B'chinas HaGili. As it's known, higher than Chochma is higher than Gili. There's no Gili altogether. So Chochma's role is the first step of Gili. Ukamaymet antu ilah, I'll call ilah, stima, I'll call stim. He's going back to Pasuk Eliyahu. You have really a whole beard in Pasuk Eliyahu in this mimer, by the way. I see he keeps using more and more phrases. So what does he say? Antu, you are, ilah, I'll call ilah. The highest, above all the highest. Stima, I'll call stimin. The concealed or covered up, above all covered up. In other words, there are many levels of stimin and ilah. There's many levels, they're higher, 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 and you're the highest above all the high ones. And you're the most covered up, the most mysterious, you can say, among all the mysterious levels, all the concealed, lofty, and ethereal levels. Vagam, okay. So what do we see from this? That Lamayla Mechachma, there's no Gili. It's all still in a state, like Keser we know is more super conscious. Consciousness begins, which means Gili. Some Gili begins with Chochma. It's a spark. It's only a Nukuda. But that's the beginning. From that, everything will develop. It's like the one cell that happens upon conception. I know I've used that example for Akudim and higher levels, but relatively speaking, so everything is included in this Nukuda, this nucleus, concentrated nucleus of Chochma is the first state of Gili. Because above it, it's Eloin, I'll call Eloin, Stimin, I'll call Stimin. But now he's going to qualify. Vagam, the Chochma bin him gam kem b'chinas Stimin. You're telling me it's higher than Chochma. We know that Chochma and Bina are also called Stimin, concealed ones, or covered up ones, or mysterious ones. Stima is basically like a secret, it's a covered up or a concealed state. Uk'moshe kosev hanistares l'Hashem Elokeinu. The secrets or that which is concealed belongs to Hashem Elokeinu. Let me explain how he's explained that. There's the pasuk that says hanistares l'Hashem Elokeinu v'aniglas lanu ulivneinu. The concealed or the mysteries or the secrets belong to God. And v'hanigles, and the revealed is for us and our children. So Chassidus explains that the first level is Yud K. Hanistaris is Yud K, which is Chochma and Bina. V'hanigles starts with Vav K. V'hanigles is Vav K. That's Zah and Malchus. So the revealed levels in Atzilus are usually Zah and Malchus. Chochma and Bina are associated with Nistaris, because it's like the mind behind the scenes, not the revealed expressions and feelings and so on. That's what it says in places. So he's saying, so though Chochma and Bina are level of stimin, okay, Ain a daemon, nevertheless, it's not comparable. You can't compare, you can't equate. Hastim is the Chochma Bina, Listim is the Keser. The concealments or the secrets or the mysteries, I mean, these are all appropriate words. But basically the concealed state, the closed state, you can even say. Something is sosum, it's like locked, sealed, closed up. You can't compare the stimus and the cover-up of Chochma Bina to that of Keser. Shezeu masha sosum ve'enu b'chinas gili klal. Because Kesed is a sosum, it's locked up, it's sosum, it's closed up, and there's no gili at all. Aval stimus the Chochma Bina, however, but the stimus, the closed up state of Chochma Bina, the status, Lashem Elokeinu, hu shagili rak la'atzmai v'lo la'elamis. So there's a gili, but it's only to himself, not to the worlds. In Vovke, v'haniglis, it becomes also to other. Let me see. If he doesn't explain, I'll explain what this means in a moment. Let me just see. But to himself, there is a state of gili. Let me finish the line, then I'll explain. And that's why Chochma is the beginning of gili. What it means is he's qualifying. It means gili to yourself. That's the meaning of beginning of gili. First, it's a gili to yourself, and then it will be revealed to others. Kesed is not even a gili to yourself, is essentially what he's saying. I know that sounds strange, but we'll explain in a moment. And yet, it's a state of gili. Yeah, albeit to yourself, not to another, but it's state of gili. Let me explain now. I mean, the easiest way to explain it is to use machshava v'dibur, thought and speech, as an example. Is machshava gili or not gili? So the answer is it's relative. To yourself, it's revealed. To another, it's concealed. I don't know what's in your thoughts. Dibur is you expressing your thoughts as much as you express them. So generally speaking, so therefore it's really a relative state. Machshava is gili, but to yourself. Now, before machshava means you're not even thinking about it yet. It may be embedded in your mind in a type of superconscious state. You're not aware of it. Right now, in your mind, you have millions of ideas. They're things we learned 10 pages ago. You have it in your mind, and if I say it, it'll jog your memory. So what's the difference between machshava and what you have in your mind before machshava and dibur? That's the difference between keser, chochma, and bina. Well, no, sorry. Keser, chochma, bina, and zah and malchus. Keser is, there's ideas there, but there's no consciousness. It just sits there. You say the Eibishter knows everything? Of course he knows everything, but he could also know it in a state of yadua. It's known to him, but he's not actively generating that particular knowledge. Machshava is chochma bina. Now it comes out gili to yourself. You're fully aware, but no one else is. And then when it comes out to another through speech, or like in this case, he's saying after chochma bina to midas, then it's a gili la'elamis. So in the process of creation, if you remember the bar mitzvah maimer, he says it, elam yichesed yibana, the two interpretations. So he says, chochma bina is like alpayim shana kodma teira la'elam. Alpayim alefcha chochma, alefcha bina. Chochma bina is beyond existence. Why? Because chochma bina is how God is conceiving of the world. Teira, kodma la'elam. It's higher than existence. It has to come into midas, because when you are concentrating on something in your mind, the other person is not benefiting. You can't have a creation of a world just through chochma bina. You need to have zah. Midas creates a relationship. Now you say, chesed, I love you. I have a relationship with you. So essentially, midas is lahazulas, chochma bina is la'atzmei. That's why you see, you can sit alone in a room and learn and understand many things. But a relationship is on the level of the midas and lower, and malchus. So for creation, actual creation, gili la'elamis, that comes through after the midas. Gili la'atzmei is chochma bina, and keser is a state where it's not even a state of gili altogether, as he said. So you see from here, different levels of stimus. There's the sasim, like he said, higher than Atzilus is sasim al kol stimin, stima al kol stimin. Chochma bina is stimin, but only relative, because that's not to another. To yourself, it is begili, and then comes the gili to another. So all this is still trying to explain the two dimensions of the ayin in Chochma. We haven't gotten there yet. So what we know from this is that it's a state of gili, but it's a gili la'atzmei. So now he continues, v'ayin mashin is bar le'il. And look, or ayin means dwell, delve, the iyun. In what was discussed earlier, dibra maskal acha sha'alti, the Maimer acha sha'alti, which I believe was right before Tishrei. Let's see. No. Sorry. Acha sha'alti was, let me just look a second. Yeah. Seitze, ki seitze. An Elamim, yeah. So he says, look there. Be'inyan bina tzayoret siyurin. There he explained that bina, the Zohar says, is tzayoret siyurim. It shapes, it defines shapes. It's like an artist. So Chochma is the spark of an idea. Bina is like when you're going to give the idea shape and form. So it's called tzayoret siyurin. It creates shape and form within the concept of Chochma. So there he explained how it's still, even the tziyurim of Bina are still in a state to yourself. It's a shape and form within the mind, not yet expressed to another. So he's saying, look there, just to understand this idea that we're talking about here. So that's
a gilui. That's what he wants to say. That it's a gilui. It's like it's a gilui.
Yeah. It's a gilui, and tziyurin is clearly not just a gilui, like Chochma, which is one dot. Like when you sit down and you draw something, you start with a dot. That's Chochma. Bina is shaping the dot. So you see it's gilui, correct. Now comes the other side of Chochma. Remember, there's two sides to everything here. The mamutza. Omnam, eira Chochma dayin ein nechshav liyesh v'dover. So despite the fact that eira Chochma is gilui, as he just explained, a lila atzmei, but still a gilui. On the other hand, it's not yet considered yesh v'davar. You can't call Chochma something of substance and yeshes. It doesn't mean yeshes here, ego. He means of substance. Ki b'Chochma yesh b'chinas bittul the ayin. Because in Chochma, you have the bittul of ayin. U'kamei shekosov ha'chochma ma'ayin timotza. Like it says clearly, Chochma ma'ayin timotza. Chochma senses the ayin. The level of bittul of ayin. On the top of page 1162, actually the bottom of 1161 and top of 1162, if you look there, he says that Eidin Sof Echad Emes Hu Levade Hu Ve'en Zelose V'Zui Madreges HaChochma. And there he explained that's really the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, when he was still explaining that all of Atzilus is on that level. So here we have two sides. Oid is Gilui, to yourself, but it's also not a yesh. It's a state of ayin to motzah. Shegam ha-chochma b'chinas ayin adayin. So he's saying not just is chochma coming from ayin, chochma itself is still a state of ayin, a state of nothingness, of no substance. Mipnei shemeir sham b'chinas ayin de keser. Okay, this is important to emphasize. When you read the pasuk itself, Chochma ma'ayin timotza, you could say Chochma comes from ayin, me'ayin. But who says Chochma is ayin? But Chassidus explains that Chochma ma'ayin timotza means Chochma is coming from the ayin of Keser, but it also is still in a state of ayin. In Samach Vav, there's a whole explanation on this topic. I believe in Ayin Beis as well. What's the difference between ayin of Keser and the ayin of Chochma? Of course, the difference is that Chochma is already a gili, but it's a gili that's in a form of ayin. I don't want to compare it to what I said earlier, the difference between atzmus and oir, but in a subtle way, in a far different way, you could say keser, the ayin, is complete nothingness. And chochma, at least, is a world of gili. There's something that you could hold on to because you're already conscious of this nothingness. Because the concept of the idea tells you, where did this come from, this idea? Or some places it says koyach ma. I don't see he uses that here. Koyach ma, the power of ma. Ma is bittul. Like Moshe said, v'nachnu ma. Ma is bittul. So he says like this. Okay. Ukamoy hamayim, like water. Water we know is an example for Chochma. So shehem begoven pashut. Water is colorless. It's a given pashut. It doesn't have a color. It's not like blue, green, red. It's a colorless color. Given pashut literally means a seamless or colorless color. Pashut means rak nidim kamoy geven hakeli. It only appears according to the color of the container in which the water is. So you put water, this colorless water, in let's say a blue cup or a blue tube, it appears blue. A red tube, a green tube. So water itself is colorless, but there's a color. You can't say there's nothing in water, but it's a colorless color. We learned this at length, if you may recall, in volume 1, when he spoke about spheres from the word sapir. So he spoke about spheres from the word transparent, like they shine. So he explained that it's like the color white. It's a colorless color. Not white, you're painting white. White before it assumed, but like the prism, before it's broken, before it's bent, the light is bent into colors. There's the white shape, white colorless state. So he says that's the level
Clear.
of Chochma. What?
Clear, not color, clear. Clear water, like.
They only appear, the water, like the color of the container. Same as with Chochma. Bina gives it seer. But Chochma does not have seer. It doesn't have shape yet. Shape of an existing entity. So to say it doesn't exist, you can't say. To say it exists in shape and form, you also can't say. So Chochma on one hand is Gilui, on the other hand, it's shapeless, seamless. Doesn't yet have that type of substance, not a yesh v'dover, like water in this case. Yeah. And why is this the case? Because Chochma carries within it, listen to this, remember on the top of the page he said that Chochma is Reishis Hagili me'atzmus hamaitzel. He's not just saying atzmus, he's saying atzmus hamaitzel, meaning the core emanator and source of Atzilus. So Chochma, due to the atzmus hamaitzel within Chochma, so Chochma does not have any shape or form yet. And yet it's a Gili. So for example, when we say that the Nakuda is Hayud, the Yud is a Nakuda, and some places says a Nakuda does not take up space. A Vav has length. A Hey has length and width. A Yud does not have space. It's true in a Sefer Torah, Yud does take space. And not only is there a Yud, but there's also a Tag Lamaila, Tag Lamata as the crown, and the snippet below. But in Inyan, Yud represents a state that in order to say it doesn't exist at all would be there's no point at all. There's no point even. There's no Yud. To say it exists in a spashtus, in any form and shape like he's describing, is also not. That's why Nakuda is the perfect example. Chassidus sometimes brings an example for this just to give it a little more, I don't want to use the word, no pun intended, a little more color. Like Keren Zovis. A Keren Zovis is where two walls meet, corner. So the question is, does a corner occupy space? You have a wall coming, let's say the east, a northern wall, and they meet here. So the corner is a Keren Zovis. Remove the two walls and you don't have anything left. On the other hand, the Keren Zovis has an entity, api halach. Another example is used the Bein Hashmoshes. The Ragachover talks about this. Bein Hashmoshes means between night and day. That's literally what it means. Between the Shemesh and the two Shamoshim. So the question is there really a moment, a second in the day that you can call Bein Hashmoshes? Because when is it exactly? So there are three opinions actually. Some say it's where night meets day, so it doesn't have any moment. It's not like day ends, let's say 6 p.m. 6:01 is Bein Hashmoshes, 6 to 6:01 is Bein Hashmoshes, and 6:02 begins night. There's an opinion, no. 6, where 6 meets, 6 o'clock, meets the second after 6, and 5:59, a second before 6, or 5:59, a second before 6, Bein Hashmoshes is like the Keren Zovis. It's not this and it's not that, it's where they meet. There's other opinions say no, it's an entity of its own. Not necessarily has a time period, but it's an entity. And some say it's a mix of both, a combination of both. So it's either neither, and it's just an imaginary point where two things meet. Either it's its own entity, or it's a mix of both. So I'm just giving an example that if you think about it abstractly, it's like a point. What's a point? It takes space or doesn't take space. So Chochma is a point in Gili, but it's still not something you can give definition to in the sense of shape and form. It's just an example. It's not a perfect example. So don't jump on me and say, and let's analyze Keren Zovis. I just wanted to give a visualization of something that's there, but it also in a way you can't say it's not there. There are other examples as well for this, but those are the two that I wanted to bring up. Okay. So you have Chochma Gili, Latzmei, and you have Chochma now, not a Yesh B'Tziur, and shaped like water. Ava Mitzatzu Reishis L'chol Atzilus. Now he goes back. But that's true from the point of view from above, that Chochma is a state of not Mitzias Dover yet. But due to the fact that it's Reishis L'chol Atzilus, that Chochma is the head, the beginning and the head of all of Atzilus, who nechshav the beginners yesh ktsas. It's considered to yesh ktsas, a minuscule yesh, meaning substance. U'kamoy shekasav kulam b'chochma asisa. Everything you've created with chochma. What do we see from that? That chochma is something. You're not just saying you created everything. Chochma is something that you use to create. So to say it's a non-entity, you can't say. So everything is created from Chochma. U'kamaymer Razal, and now he's going to the Maimer Razal, Bereishis nami Maimerhu. Bereishis is also an expression of God. Basar Mamoris Nivreelam. He Rakia, that's at Shiur. But the first Maimer, the Maimer Echad Yochel Hi Boris, Chassidus says, is the Maimer of Chochma. The rest go through the 9 other spheres. What is Bereishis? Bereishis, on one hand, everything is created, all in a nucleus. There's no definitions yet. On the other hand, it's a maimer. God said, Bereishis nami maimerhu. Bereishis bar elikim. It's also a form of expression.
Yenasam ben Uziel or Yerushalmi explaining Bereishis b'chuchmasa.
Yeah, he brought that earlier too. I believe we learned that earlier. I think it was up here as well. Let me see. I'm almost sure that he said it somewhere. In this mimer even. Okay. So what do we have now? So we have two sides to Chochma. On one hand, Gilui and Yesh Ktsas. On the other hand, higher and Bitl of Ayin. So he says, Vehein. Now he's going to explain it. Vehein Beis Madrege Sheba Chochma. These are two levels in Chochma that he said on top from the Biuri Azeir Parsha Yetzeh. B'chinas Chetzenis HaChochma or Primis HaChochma. The outer dimension of Chochma, which of course is the Gilui and the Yesh Ktsas, there's some substance, something. Like I said with the Yud. On the other hand, Primis HaChochma, which is the higher state, that it's the Bitl of Ayin, completely reflecting its source. Ayin Mashin is Bar L'il Dibra Maskal Sheftim. So Sheftim, I don't remember exactly, I'm just looking there quickly. Oh, there was back to the, talking about, yeah. 2 levels of Einig. There we discussed the Man, Shabbos. Okay, it's another discussion. Okay, Beis Madrei this. Okay. So now we've established that the 2 levels of Ayin are Atzilus in general. Due to its dveikus, its attachment, connection to the divine, is the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Due to its being a source for the Yesh, for the creation, Ayin of Yesh Anivra. And now, in Atzilus itself, in Chochma of Atzilus, both dimensions. Due to the dveikus, to its being bittul of Ayin, that it is the Atzmus Hamaitzil within Chochma, it's a state of Ayin of Yesh Amiti. And due to the Gilui, at least to yourself, And yesh ksas, as he put it, so it's now in a state also of the Ayin of Yesh HaNivra, in Chochma itself. Now it continues. V'zehu ki'inyan sha'teira hi memutza ben erein sof le'elamis. And this is similar to, it's like the inyan, where we find that the Torah is an interface between the infinite divine and the worlds. In volume 1, when he's speaking about all the different memutzayim interfaces, so he also brought that Torah is also an interface. So he's going to compare these two levels of Chochma and Torah. So we find in Torah, uksiv ba, and about Torah we find, it's written about Torah, oita er kesalma, robe yourself. He robed himself, he clothed himself with oir like a shirt. So the Eibishter, who's lemaila from any type of garment, he used oita oir kesalma. He dressed himself up, he enclosed himself. Oita means to wrap yourself with oir like a garment, like a shirt. So the Eibishter dressed himself up like a shirt.
Salmo is a dress, I think.
Huh?
A dress that is circling you all around, I think.
Yeah, like a talus more. Yeah. Like shawl, maybe like a shawl. Yeah, because simla, you're right. Simla is a shirt. Salma, lamed before the mem, is more of I think a larger garment. Yeah. But I think there's a different types. I think kisalma, some people type kisimla, some say kisalma. I think there's different interpretation. But regardless, a robe, a shawl, yeah. She has Beis madregas, because here the interesting word here is, he uses the word oir, but he says like a garment. He says, because there's two levels, oir v'salma. There's the level of oir and the level of salma, a garment. V'hu pnimis v'chitzeni shebetera. Oir and salma are two levels in Torah, the inner and the outer dimension of Torah. The chitzeni Torah, the outer dimension of Torah, which is generally nigla the Torah. But it could also be in general, the outer dimension, ba b'hagbola. It comes in defined, limited expressions. Like all the laws of Torah, hagbola. The laws of shatnez, the laws of Shabbos, the laws of kashrus. Every law is specific. It's not blikvul. It's not about the infinite. It's about structure. Like remember we talked about mitzvahs. Every mitzvah is specific mitzvah. Every halacha, every din is bagbala. It's about a defined situation, a defined mitzvah, a defined din. V'yesh midah v'shir b'teira. And in Torah there's a midah v'shir. There are measurements. And shiurim, midah is measurement. Shiur is what's another word for midah v'shir? Measurements and parameters, or maybe parameters and measurements. Like the kazayis, or how a sukkah has to be built, or the size of tefillin. Everything is midah v'shirim, midah v'shir, legabe elam. In legabe elam, from the perspective of the world, in other words, midah v'shir, that the world relates to. I think that's what he means, legabe elam. Another, or maybe he means that from our perspective, it's midah v'shir, but really it could be higher than that. That could be also correct. Ukadisa be'erevin, daf chaf aleph amid aleph, like he says in Erevin 21a, Nimtza elam kuli echad megimel alofim masayim b'teira. I'll tell you the truth, I have to look it up. I'm not sure what it means. Does anybody know? That the world is one part of 3,200 in Torah. I'm going to look it up. I don't want to guess. It sounds like the Torah has a big midah v'shir. The world is only one part, one of basically 3,200. I have to look up what he means there. I definitely learned it, but I remember right now. Okay. But the inner dimension of Torah, basically it's proof that there's measurement. That's the bottom line, with real parameters and measurement. But primis Torah ain't a b'chinas midah v'agbola. The inner dimension of Torah doesn't have any limits and measurements. So kedisa b'medrash Rabbah, like the Medrash Rabbah says, l'chol yesh sikusim chutz mevat. Chutz medavar echad. Everything has sikusim. Sikusim means sikusim means the measurements in Aramaic, I believe. Except one thing, she'ein le sikus, that does not have a measurement. V'hu ha-teira, that's the teira. Like it says, aruchem eretz midah rechavim min hayam. V'hainu primis ha-teira. That's referring to primis ha-teira. V'hu l'maylam ha'elam, that's higher than the world. The first dimension of Torah relates to the world. It's larger, but it relates with a measurement. So it says these are the two levels of Chochma. Or b'chlolus, now he goes back to Atzilus. So b'chlolus Atzilus, Beis hamadrega shebemamutza, the two levels of this interface. Hein b'chinas Chochma lo v'Chochma tata. Now before he said primis ha-Chochma, chetzenis ha-Chochma, now he's saying higher wisdom and lower wisdom. He b'chinas Malchus. I'm sorry, the Chochma Tatoi b'chinas Malchus. So earlier he said it's two levels in Chochma Ilah. Now he's saying the two levels is Chochma Ilah and Chochma Tata. Chochma Tata is Malchus. Zeh b'chinas Ayin shal yesh hanivra. U'kamosh nizbar le'el, as was explained earlier. V'Chochma Ilah shal hamaylam ha'elamis. And the higher Chochma, Chochma of Atzilus, not the Chochma in Malchus. Who is higher than worlds. That's the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. The core emanator. So here we have, in this mimer, which is now the conclude, the rest is going to be the end of the mimer answering the questions. He explains how Atzilus, first he begins that Atzilus is only Das Elyon, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Then he explains that Atzilus has both. In Atzilus itself, Chochma has both Primis and Chetzenis HaChochma, which is similar to the two levels in Torah, Primis and Chetzenis HaTorah. And now he's saying, more specifically in Atzilus, Chochma Ilah is the Ayin of Yesh Amiti, and Chochma Tata Malchus is the Ayin that relates to creating existence. And obviously, all levels, all this is correct. It just depends, it's all relative of where you're speaking. So you have now the Ayin of Yesh Amiti and Ayin of Yesh Hanivra placed in different places in Ishtalshalus, namely here in Atzilus. So we'll stop here at the end of this paragraph.